Science is constantly evolving. With new studies and research coming out every day, there are hundreds of thousands of researchers all over the world trying to understand and create something that can be life-changing for people. But to ensure that these researchers are able to conduct proper research, clear of any errors or mishaps, they have to make sure of one major thing: the safety of themselves and their lab staff. So why is lab safety so important, you might ask? Being precautious in a lab not only helps keep lab personnel safe, but also helps researchers avoid any possible complications that can arise due to being unsafe, such as cross-contamination of equipment, spilling of chemicals, and even just using the incorrect materials to conduct the research that they're trying to do. While we may feel like we're in a safe working environment in the lab, it is important to be aware of the possible hazards that you may be around or might be working with. So you might wonder, what are these hazards anyways? Hazards are typically categorized into three main categories. The first category is chemical hazards. This can be anything from cleaning supplies such as disinfectants to other chemicals such as paint, gases, as well as chemicals that may cause burns or reactions upon touch or unprotected exposure. The next category is biological hazards. Some biological hazards that are commonly used in the lab are viruses, infectious diseases, and allergens. And the third category is physical hazards. This can include potential slipping or falling hazards in wet areas, hazards involving repetitive tasks such as pushing, pulling, or lifting items, as well as electrical and mechanical issues such as using machines. To avoid potential hazards, labs set in place various measures to ensure all individuals entering the lab are working in a safe environment, while also ensuring that all experiments are being done properly to avoid inaccuracies or errors in the results. Now that we have an idea of potential hazards and risks in the lab, what are some key practices to be safe? A standard operating procedure, also known as an SOP, is a detailed document in the lab outlining how to safely work with hazardous materials and carry out the expected procedures. The SOP in each lab can be different, as the lab supervisor is responsible for creating an SOP specially crafted to the expectations of their research study. It is important to read the SOP of the lab that you're working in because it outlines the risks of the hazardous materials you may be working with, the equipment that you need, as well as how to dilute or lower the concentration of chemicals that are being used in an experiment. An SOP also outlines ways to control or prevent any accidents in the lab. Before entering a lab, it is important to follow and wear the correct personal protective equipment, or PPE. Some common lab PPE practices involve tying your hair back if you have longer hair, wearing a lab coat, wearing appropriate eye protection, and disposable gloves. However, depending on the research and the chemicals or equipment being used, there may be PPE that is better suited than the standard, such as a face shield when working with chemicals that can potentially splash, earmuffs when working with loud machinery, and face masks to prevent inhalation of toxic fumes. A lot of research in the lab also involves different kinds of chemicals. While some chemicals may be harmless to the touch, other chemicals can cause serious reactions such as chemical burns, irritation, or inhalation of toxic fumes. To ensure safe handling of chemicals inside the lab, safety data sheets, also known as SDSs, are provided by the manufacturer alongside each chemical when purchased. It is the responsibility of the lab supervisor to ensure that all SDSs are available to the lab staff in a binder inside the lab. An SDS outlines the hazards of the products, precautions to take when handling the product such as appropriate PPE, possible symptoms of exposure to the chemical, as well as first aid and emergency measures in the event of an accident involving hazardous chemicals were to occur. When working with hazardous substances, labs typically use a separate area with its own ventilation system called a fume hood. A fume hood is an enclosed window-like area that has a sliding door, which can be raised or lowered depending on its use. Within the fume hood, individuals using hazardous chemicals can work with the chemicals on the work surface while also protecting themselves from any chemical fumes or spills. The fume hood will use its ventilation system and remove the fumes from the working area so that individuals within the lab are not exposed to them. Now that we've gone through the key practices to being safe in the lab, it is important to remember that there are so many resources available to us within the lab to ensure our safety and well-being. To ensure that you are safe in the lab, it is important to be informed and trained for the procedures, materials, and equipment that you will be expected to handle. If you are unaware or not well trained to work with certain equipment, it is important to ask for training and be supervised while learning. Being safe in a lab is crucial for the well-being of not only yourself, but all members of the lab, as well as ensuring that all lab protocols are being conducted properly while avoiding any avoidable errors for successful research. We hope that you've learned something useful today, and we will see you next time on Demystifying Research.